Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. It's finally the Big Ten's turn. The other three power conferences have had their media days. Now it's the Big Ten's turn this week to get talking season underway. We'll touch on Purdue's trip to Big Ten Media Days on Wednesday, look at some of the talking points to expect from Purdue and from the Big Ten as a whole. And with college football under the microscope, we will look at where Purdue stands in the grand scheme of things in the sport entering a critical 2026 season. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. I've had fun tweeting about the Purdue basketball up in Vancouver. We'll have an episode later this week recapping that. We'll be talking Purdue football at media days, possible athletic director hire looming, all of it. Come join the conversation on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and the show is now available on YouTube. I have joined the 2020s decade now where everyone's on YouTube. Now the show is as well. So go over to YouTube, Boilers and Beyond. Subscribe, turn on notifications for new episodes, however you like to consume your podcasts, your shows. We are everywhere, and I appreciate you all. And feel free to send in questions on Twitter at BoilersBeyond, and you can email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. But Big Ten Media Days are this week, Tuesday through Thursday at the Hilton in Chicago. It's back in the Windy City where it was for really forever before COVID moved it to Lucas Oil Stadium. As I recall, last year was at Mandalay Bay out in Las Vegas. I think that sounds right. This year it's back in Chicago, a little bit more sensible of a site, the central hub of the Big Ten. And Purdue goes on Wednesday. Barry Odom will speak alongside his three-player representatives, Ryan Brown, Charles Correa, Denylon Morissette. I'm not sure that there's much that Barry Odom can say at this point. Fans want to see it. They don't want to be told. Purdue fans want to see proof of concept, proof of progress, that Purdue can be competitive on the field in 2026. It's no secret that the last few years have been rough. We've talked about it ad nauseum on the show, and we're going to talk about it more today as we look at where Purdue stands in the grand scheme of things. But talk is cheap. Purdue has to be able to go out on the football field this year and show tangible progress. At media days, you're going to get a lot of the rah-rah. You're going to hear Barry Odom talk confidently about his team. You're going to hear Barry Odom talk about how much Purdue has progressed and how year two is going to be better. That's great. And he has to say that. This is all pretty performative. But I'm excited to hear which players that he really seems to talk about in an excited manner. Maybe the players you don't expect. You know he's going to be very complimentary of Ryan Brown and certainly of Charles Correa and Denylon Morissette because they're with him at Media Day. But who are some of the guys? Who are some of the transfers in? Who are some of the guys that you haven't heard a ton about that he references time and time again? That's what I'm curious to see. He's a pretty even-keeled guy. He's pretty level-headed. So when you hear those glimpses, maybe that gives you an idea of a player or two that he's excited about that we may not be aware of. I'm curious to hear him talk about the big picture stuff. Again, there are so many moving pieces in college football right now, but Barry Odom's been a head coach at 3 different places now. He's been a head coach in 2 different power conferences, in the 2 power conferences. He's seen it. And he's been a head coach at programs in the 2 power conferences that aren't necessarily the most advantaged. Missouri's a good program, but Missouri is not Alabama. It's not Georgia. It's not Texas in the SEC. And again, Purdue, same deal. It's not Ohio State. It's not Michigan. It's not Oregon. His perspective is interesting. I'm curious to hear what he has to say. You'll never get it, But I'd love to hear Ryan Brown talk about how injured he was or wasn't in the second half of last year. I don't expect to hear it, but I'd love to. And with Charles Correa there, the defensive coordinator situation is so interesting. There's not a lot of optimism from the fan base about Kevin Kane, and understandably so. I mean, the last time you saw Kevin Kane at Purdue, Purdue gave up 66 points in that last game. I mean, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't Kevin Kane calling the defense or really organizing the defense for much of that, but there's responsibility there nonetheless. I'm curious to hear what Purdue wants to do, to hear some of the talking points about the defense. But all in all, media days are what they are. It's a performative spectacle. It's just to get fans excited, to get the conference commissioners talking. And that's what really this is all about now. You hear about the programs. You know, Barry Odom just did an interview that posted on On3 today with Pete Nakos, where you hear him talk about a lot of things. And you get this stuff now 24/7, 365. I am very curious, though, with where the Big Ten stands on things. You know, the Big Ten and Tony Petitti are going to push heavily for the 24-team college football playoff. It's interesting where you hear the Big Ten and SEC spar on things right now, like the playoff size, like some of the nitty-gritty stuff, but they're both very in lockstep on other items. In the real big picture, that they are not sharing money with the Big 12, the ACC. They're not sharing power with the Big 12 and the ACC. It's all about what's going on in Washington right now, and it doesn't look likely that this Protect College Sports Act is going to go through. It's not officially dead yet, as I record this on July 26th, but it certainly doesn't sound promising, and that means more time without any real rules around college sports. Like it or not, the NCAA has been toothless in trying to enforce its rules when it's faced in court. It's getting smoked on everything. It's why you have NIL. It's why you have unrestricted transfers. The NCAA fought against both of those. It fought against NIL tooth and nail until it lost 9-0 in the Supreme Court. It lost lawsuits about transfers, so it allowed a one-time transfer. Then the one-time restriction lost in court, so they have to let guys play or transfer as many times as they want. Until something is codified into law, or you get these antitrust exemptions from the Supreme Court or Congress, you're fighting an uphill battle. The SEC expressed some level of willingness to break away from NCAA enforcement. I didn't take that as the SEC wanting to break away altogether, but it was the SEC at least entertaining the idea of creating its own rules to be enforced, creating its own conference rules, which is legal. Whether the Big Ten tells you it has or not, it has. I mean, let's not be naive here. The Big Ten is willing to do the same thing. Whether it comes out and says it or not, I don't know. But the Big Ten's willing to do the same thing. These two conferences have the power to go out and enforce the rules. The question is, do these leagues actually want to be enforced? Do you want to put a cap on what these top schools are spending? Because I can assure you, Purdue wants limits on spending. Minnesota wants limits on spending. Northwestern, Mississippi State. But does Indiana want that? It doesn't look like it based off what it's spending in these sports, in football and in men's basketball. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas A&M? I don't think so. That's what's always interesting to follow here. But, you know, the way the Big Ten talks about the future will be very telling, because the Big Ten's also in an interesting spot where right now it has the richest TV deal in sports, in college sports, but it did not have a particularly good year of TV ratings. And as 2030 looms, with the TV deal up at that point, and then the Big Ten grant of rights in 2036, we're a long way from there, but we're really not. We're getting close. So Everything the Big Ten says about the big picture, that's what I'm most interested from media days. And it's always interesting to hear the Big Ten talk because you have a very wide range of interests in the Big Ten. That's what's the most interesting about the Big Ten and the SEC and the way they talk. For better or for worse, the Big Ten has won the last 3 national titles, and you have a handful of schools in the Big Ten that are absolutely all in on winning national titles. They have the money to do so. These top schools of the Big Ten have as much money as anyone, if not more money than other schools. The SEC, on the other hand, has more schools that have won a national title in the modern era, but it also hasn't had that same level of high-end success in the NIL era. It's the top that's going to get their way at the end of the day. Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, they're the ones that are going to get their way. So it's an interesting dichotomy there when you compare the two leagues, because at the end of the day, it comes down to what they want. If the Big Ten and the SEC wanted from the start this Protect College Sports Act to get through, it would be through by now, but it's not. So I'm very interested to hear how Tony Petitti and some of the bigger names in the conference talk about these things at Big Ten Media Day this week, Tuesday through Thursday up in Chicago. And then on next week's podcast, we'll talk about some takeaways and see where things stand in Congress. But before we get back to the Boilermakers, I want to tell you about someone that I know and trust, and that is myself. If you've been putting off reviewing your insurance, now's the time to get a quote from myself, Jordan Jones with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance. Whether it's home, auto, life, or business insurance, I'll take the time to understand what you need and make sure you're properly protected. There's no pressure, no obligation, just a chance to see if you can get the right coverage at a competitive price. Give me a call or reach out today, 317-846-5861. Get you a free quote and let me know that you heard about it here on the podcast. Now, back to Purdue sports. But all of these big picture conversations make for a very interesting time at Purdue. Purdue is in a fascinating spot when you look at replacing an athletic director. It sounds like there could be a hire fairly soon there. Replacing a university president who said all the right things about sports, but we don't know how into sports Mung Chang really was. Now Purdue's in a really interesting spot. It's been a perfect storm of problems for Purdue football over the last few years, and football drives everything. For as great as Purdue basketball has been, for as many tickets as it sells in Mackey Arena, and the price of the tickets and the NCAA tournament success, it's a football world. And football has been really poor over the last 3 years. The Ryan Walters hire was a disaster. And Purdue tried to hit a 500-foot home run. Purdue tried to bet on a young guy. And look, if you can hit on a guy like that, it's awesome. Look at Oregon with Dan Lanning. I know that's a reckless comparison to make, but you get a young, energetic guy who can sell a vision and can go out and recruit, and you back it up on the field, it's awesome. That's an awesome place to be. I get what Purdue was trying to do, but it didn't work. And it didn't work in epic fashion. This wasn't something where Purdue just lost. I mean, it was ugly. It was ugly. Purdue had its 2 worst losses in program history in 2024 to the 2 other power conference schools in the state of Indiana. That's brutal. I think 6 of the 11 losses that year were by 20 or more points. When Purdue lost, it got pounded into oblivion. And when you have a hire just crash and burn and fail epically like that, it's going to come with consequences. In any era of college football, that's been true. But in this era, absolutely. Because Purdue's had roster turnover like you wouldn't believe. It's been impossible for Purdue to build on something because players haven't had incentive to stick around. You've seen Purdue's best players leave. Some of this roster turnover has been by design. When you have a culture like Ryan Walters built at Purdue, move on. Just flush it and move on. I get it. Purdue did not recruit at an astonishingly high level towards the end of the Braum era. That's not a secret. I think some fans really overstate the dire position that Purdue's roster was in, but it wasn't a super deep roster. There were some good players. Dylan Thieneman, Will Helt, Max Clare, Deion Burks, Nick Scorton. All these guys were recruited by Jeff Braum and are now in the NFL, except Will Helt. He's still at Clemson, but a lot of buzz there. Purdue needed more talent than it had. But at the same time, you look back at that 2023, 2024 teams, there was more talent than the results on the field would indicate. Ryan Walters bet on the wrong transfers. He brought in a fairly highly regarded high school class in the one class he saw through from start to finish, but it all crashed and burned. Purdue was starting over fresh when Barry Odom came in, but by the time Purdue made a hire, by the time Barry Odom was in West Lafayette, he'd had his introductory press conference, and he could start recruiting transfers, he was behind the eight ball. Guys knew where they were going already, and schools had momentum to fundraise on that Purdue didn't have. It was a tricky position for him. It doesn't excuse Purdue being so poor last season, but it might be a reason. And there's a difference between an excuse and a reason. There's always going to be roster turnover, but the roster turnover that Purdue has had is not sustainable. It makes things really difficult unless you are spending the $40, the $50 million on your roster like some of these top teams in the Big Ten are. Purdue hasn't had that. And that's what makes this all a tricky conversation, because I'm not saying that Purdue doesn't have any money. That's not true. But it's very clear Purdue was not at the forefront of the NIL game. Ryan Walters didn't fail because Purdue didn't have competitive NIL funding. That's not why he failed, but it certainly didn't help matters. Purdue was late to the game. And whether that's a failure from the athletic department, a fan base that didn't really embrace it and still probably doesn't to a degree, a combination of both, a lack of billionaire boosters, I'll let you decide. Generally, it's a combination of things. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But what's done is done. The last 3 seasons has been woeful. The last 2 are the worst 2-year stretch in Purdue history. Purdue hasn't won a Big Ten conference game since November of 2023. Hasn't beaten a Power 4 opponent since then. This season is huge. Purdue needs positive momentum in the worst way. What does that look like? I'm not really sure. Is it 4 wins? Because 4-8 is not a great season. By any objective measure, 4-8 is not particularly good. You're not close to a bowl game. You're probably only winning 2 or 3 Big Ten games. But boy, it's doubling your win total. It's more games than you've won the last 2 years combined. That's a scary reality. It shows you how dire the times have been. But at the same time, reality in the Big Ten looks different than it used to. Being in the Big Ten right now isn't easy. I said this at the start. When the Big Ten added these West Coast schools, it was a big blow to Purdue. It really was, because Purdue had fought so hard to get to where it needed to be in football from an investment standpoint, to get Ross-Ade Stadium into the 21st century, to build the performance complex, to get an operational standpoint of your coaching staff, and to operate at a Big Ten level. Purdue wasn't always that way. And to Mike Babinski's credit, he got Purdue there. Didn't make the right coaching hire back in 2022, but he got Purdue there from a financial standpoint. Then you bring in 4 schools that have a higher ceiling than you. You bring in 2 programs in USC and Oregon that aspire to win national titles. You bring in a damn good program in Washington, and you bring in a program in UCLA whose potential has always been higher than its production, but is produced at a fairly high level when you compare it to Purdue nonetheless. That's a blow. Purdue does itself no favors by playing the non-conference schedule that it chooses to play. And we'll break down the schedule more next week on the show, but it doesn't help Purdue right now. I think in the not so distant future, you're going to see more non-conference schedules resemble Purdue's. I think Fox is fed up with the lack of inventory that the Big Ten gives it in non-conference play. When you look at the first 3 weeks of Fox's Big Noon kickoff, you have 2 games against G5 competition. You have Indiana, North Texas, and you have Ohio State, Kent State on Big Noon kickoff. That's not going to fly with what Fox is paying the Big Ten. You can complain about Purdue's non-conference schedule, and you probably should, because it's not doing Purdue any favors right now. But that is going to change. You are going to see that become the norm in the Big Ten. There's too much money at stake for the Big Ten to let schools schedule the way they do. But for right now, it's a clear competitive disadvantage. Purdue is dealing with competitive disadvantages right now, and that's not even when you mention the amount that's being spent on the roster. You factor that in, that's the great unknown. I don't like just pointing to the money aspect. It's not all about money. You can have all the money in the world. Look at Kentucky basketball last year, and you cannot have smashing success. There are plenty of football programs that have spent big on rosters and haven't really seen the ROI. But at the same time, to quote Kanye West, having money isn't everything, not having it is. And where Purdue stacks up, we really don't know. I think this season is a really good litmus test. It's been very well documented. Barry Odom and the management side of things with Brandon Lee and Butler Benton have been incredibly transparent that Purdue withheld some of its revenue sharing money from last season to help fund this year's team. That should help this team be more competitive. That is more money to put on the field. It's no secret that revenue sharing isn't working as intended. That's clear as day. The quote-unquote cap that comes with it has been wildly ineffective. In the low 20 million range, there are basketball programs just by themselves over 20 million. There was an article in The Athletic that I read this morning from Brendan Marks about the reality of spending in basketball, where you see plenty of schools spending 20 million. Football, I mean, there are schools spending 40, 50 million dollars. We know Purdue isn't in that ballpark. How many Big Ten teams are? We don't know. We don't know the answer to that. Now, it's pretty clear. Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, probably Michigan, USC, they're spending. But what does it look like at Maryland, at Rutgers, at Illinois, at Minnesota, Michigan State, the programs that Purdue's trying to compete with? We don't really know. I don't think some of those schools are in that crazy high range, but shouldn't the proof come on the field? Purdue's in kind of a tricky spot here. It has a seat at the table. It's a Big Ten program, and every single school that's not in the Big Ten or the SEC would trade places with Purdue in a heartbeat. Like that. They would trade places. Purdue has Big Ten money. The Big 12 and the ACC schools don't. That's huge. That's everything. But on the other hand, you're competing in the Big Ten. Everyone else in the Big Ten has Big Ten money, naturally, right? That's why I think you look at like a Wake Forest game, and it's so fascinating. It's such a measuring stick. How do you compare to programs like that? Do you see that difference play out? And there are a lot of games for the Big Ten that are like that this year. Purdue's been behind the 8 ball for numerous reasons in football. But right now, it's your time to break through. It's year 2 of Barry Odom. He had the transfer portal is open as possible this year. The full dollars and cents of it all, I don't know. But if Purdue is, as Barry Odom says, competitive, that he has all the resources he needs, then you should see Purdue break through and win some games this year. I'm not saying Purdue's going to go 8-4. That's probably not realistic. But Purdue shouldn't be winless in the Big Ten if Purdue has everything it needs. And if not, boy, then you're really looking at why this athletic director hire is so important. Barry Odom was hired because of his experience, because of his maturity, because of his ability to get Purdue out of this mess. Purdue has had time to figure things out financially. It made those intentional moves to put a more competitive team on the field this fall. Now for Purdue, it's time to show it. And it's time for Purdue to show that when you're looking at the future of college football, that Purdue is there, that Purdue is ready, willing, and able to compete at that level. But that's what I've got for today, guys. I appreciate you spending your time with me. As I said, I'm planning to do something a little bit later this week to talk about Purdue basketball and its Canadian trip. I'm recording this before Sunday night's game. If the Vancouver selects were any indication, it's going to be really hard to take anything significant from this because the competition level is so atrocious. But we'll talk about it nonetheless. We'll talk about what we see. And then next week, a detailed look at Purdue's schedule. We'll go opponent by opponent. Some thoughts on the overall composition of the schedule, the dynamics at play with scheduling, and ultimately answering the question, how many games can Purdue win this fall? So be sure, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and tell a friend, guys. We're getting closer to football season. Let's keep the momentum going. I appreciate you all. Follow the show on Twitter and send me any questions. Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Email, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Until next time, guys, take care.